This is a little bio about our speaker. Steve grew up in Brownwood, Texas, outside of town in the heart of rattlesnake country, where he started catching snakes and learning about animals as a kid. Brownwood is about 200 miles northwest of Georgetown. He's a 1978 graduate of Texas A&M College Station, majoring in wildlife and range science. He became the state environmental coordinator for the USDA in Texas. In 2005, he started Kelly Environmental Consulting. He provides environmental assessment and analysis, along with wildlife habitat evaluations, primarily for state, federal, and state-funded water and wastewater projects in rural areas throughout Texas. And he has a hobby. Steve and his wife, Kathy, both love traveling out to the Trans-Pecos region to find and document snakes. So after having said that, I turn this over to Steve.
Where is Steve? Okay, so I'm going to highlight Steve, spotlight Steve.
And Steve can screen share.
Can you see it?
Oh, yes.
You can see the program, okay, everyone?
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Okay, thank you all for showing up today. Let's talk a little bit about snakes. I know everybody wants to know about snakes. It's late getting here. I had to go make a quick call, get a snake that was stuck in a glue trap, not far from Bill's house up there, but luckily we got it out and it's all good now. Let's talk about what snakes we have here in Sun City. I wanted to try to keep this more to Sun City. There's a lot of snakes around the world, but we would have to be here for days if we were going to cover those. There's 16 species of snakes found in Sun City since Jim Christensen started record keeping in 2004. He moved here, he worked with the developer and said, I want to do a research. And so they helped him out and said, go ahead, start documenting snakes. We currently have 4 snake wranglers. The snake wranglers kind of came up on his own. We're independent. We don't work for or with anybody. The CA just kind of says, go ahead, do what you want, but we don't want to go with you. And that's me, Jim Christensen, John Leake, and Joe Plunkett. And all of us are really familiar with the identification of the snakes we have here in Sun City. We're currently looking at about 2,300 records almost that have been logged in between 2009 and 2018. We could probably add about 350 to that for 2019, but we don't have those all put together yet. Over the last 5 years, snake wranglers, we averaged 343 calls per year. I'll show you a graph in a minute, and most of the increase has been due to residents calling us and reporting snakes, and we're getting some really nice people now that they've learned what's a harmless snake, but they will send me a text or one of the other guys a text with a picture, and so we can record that one too. And we want to encourage everybody to do that. Whether you want it moved or need any help, just let us know so we can add it to our records. But we have to have a picture good enough that we can identify it. This data is going to be put together. Dr. Christensen's going to write a paper. He's published some papers for, well, a lot of scientific papers on other subjects, but this one's going to be particular to Sun City. One of the obstacles I've had doing the technical side of it has been the geographical mapping. So anyone in Sun City that has expertise in that, please let me know. I could use some help in that. Let's talk about the snakes we find here in Sun City. The 16 species we have: the Texas rat snake, also called the western rat snake, the Great Plains rat snake, the eastern hognose, the Texas patchnose, the red striped ribbon snake, the black-necked garter snake, the eastern coach whip, the rough earth snake, the rough green snake, the yellow belly, also called a blue racer, plain belly blotched water snake. We kind of refer to it as a blotched water snake more. Diamondback water snake, DK's brown snake, Texas blind snake. And then the two venomous species we have here is the Texas coral snake and the western diamondback rattlesnake. The snakes that we don't find in Sun City, generally anywhere around Georgetown, are the broad-banded copperhead and the western cottonmouth. And this is a pretty contentious subject. I guess I've been debating this for people for years now. And lots of people believe we have copperheads here, and they say they've killed a copperhead here, or they've seen a cottonmouth down in the river. We have never confirmed one. I know a number of people around Georgetown that are herpers, which are amateur herpetologists, and there just aren't any records. They're just not here. I'd love to find a copperhead. Most people see a different snake and they believe it's a copperhead. This is the snakes we have mostly here in Sun City. This kind of gives you a breakdown those records. You can see the most numerous snake, most common snake we have here is the Texas rat snake. I'll talk about each one of these as we go down. This gives you an idea. The diamondback rattlesnake's the second most calls we get. Texas patchnose, coach whip, and on down. Those yellow-bellied racers and Texas blind snakes, we don't see very much. We'd like to find more of those, but we've had 3 yellow-bellied racers in 10 years. Well, I know we have 4 now if you count 2019, because one was located last month. Now we'll go talk about a little bit about our local snakes. Y'all can ask me questions at the end, but I've tried to group these together so it might make it easier on everyone when they see a snake out in their yard or wherever they are. The non-venomous first. I made these groups up, so this isn't some scientific paper. First ones I call the snakes with patterns. The second one is the snakes with stripes. And stripes means the length of the body, not around the body. Those are bands, not stripes. What I call the just pretty much solid colored snakes, the water snakes, and then there's a category I refer to as the little guys, and then the 2 venomous species we have. So we'll start off with the non-venomous snakes with a pattern. And this is our most common one. Probably all of y'all have seen this at one time or another in Sun City. This is a Texas rat snake. I will say that colors vary tremendously. They can be reddish. They can have really bright yellow on them. On the snake guide that John Leake and I put together, that I'll show you later if you don't have a copy of that, there's a very brilliant color yellowish rat snake. I count that a lot to John being an outstanding, passionate photographer that found the prettiest rat snake in the world and took its picture. So they mostly look like this. This is more common than the real pretty bright ones, but I've seen some really, really nice looking ones. When you find a snake climbing in Sun City, up the side of your house, up your gutters, in your trees, and it's a large snake, it's going to be a Texas rat snake. They are, most birders aren't real thrilled about this particular snake because they are amazing at climbing and raiding bird nests. If you see one up near your bird nest or in your bird house, your bird or eggs are gone because they've already cleaned them out. I've seen these guys climb in the middle of a porch where a birdhouse was hung in the middle of a 10-foot square porch from the ceiling. And they called me, and there was a rat snake crammed inside of it that he was so large we had to take the birdhouse apart. Somehow he was able to go straight up the wall and suspend itself over and get into that birdhouse. They can crawl right up the side of a stucco wall. This was an interesting call I got. You can see this rat snake, the same snake, it's got more yellow in it. This lady houses we have here that has a patio with a storage area underneath it. She'd been seeing this large snake and several times go in, and she didn't know what it was. And we went and looked, and we're about to give up, and I finally lifted the lid on the grill, and it was sitting on the grill. Rats and mice love to go up and clean your grills for you. So that's where these guys sit and wait for them to show up. She actually told me to put the lid back on and leave it there because she would rather have it than the rats. And so we did. We left it there. But I've seen lots of rat snakes inside of grills. Some big, elaborate grills, they can get really deep inside of them. And this is what we call the rat snake face. Most snake people are really familiar with this in a rat snake. We call it the rat snake face because rat snakes are really harmless. You can see this is a pretty large one, and their teeth are about the length of Velcro, which this one could break the skin, but that's about all it could do to you is break your skin. They will hiss at you, they'll rattle their tail, try to sound like a rattlesnake, and if all else fails, they'll show you this face. And what they're trying to say is, I'm scary and leave me alone. What? But the truth is, their bark is bigger than their bite. And this is their bark, is trying to intimidate people and run them off. This is one pretty similar, and this is a Great Plains rat snake. You see these more at night during the daytime. They only get about 3 or 4 feet. They're more true to color. And you can tell the Great Plains rat snake because they have an arrow, almost an arrowhead shape on the top of their head. And they nearly are all this exact same color. These are harmless too. And I didn't mention on the Texas rat snake or this one, unless you pick it up and grab it, it's not going to bite you. And the truth is that we pick up lots of them that don't even attempt to bite us. I've got several Great Plains rat snakes. I just grab them and pick them up, and they're happy. Get really scared, then they'll try to bite me. This is one of our most interesting snakes, and one that seems to scare people. I've had people call me in a panic, and they say, I've got this horrible, horrible, ugly snake, and it's terrible, and come quick because this is a horrible snake. Actually, it's a hognose snake, and this is one who is flared out. They can flare out kind of like a cobra to try to look bigger. These are probably the biggest bluffers of any snake we have in Sun City. They can make a loud hiss. They can puff up. They'll rattle their tail. They will strike at you, but I have never had one open its mouth and actually bitten me. They'll strike at you and hit you with their nose. Even one, I got one day, a lady panicked. She saw one going in her garage when she was pulling up, and she hit the garage door opener, and it was a pretty large one. They only get about 3.5 feet maximum. And the garage door shut on it mid-body. And it was pinned enough that it didn't injure it, but it couldn't get loose. And when I got there, I told her to hit the garage door opener and raise the garage door. I picked it up, and it didn't even attempt to bite me, even though it was pretty distressed and unhappy. These are the toad eaters. they really feed on the Gulf Coast toad. It's the most common toad you see in your yards. That's their favorite food by far. This is a picture of another one, and you can see how people sometimes mistake these for a rattlesnake, but this one happens to be puffed out. He's got his neck puffed out, so that's a dead giveaway. They nearly all have this spot here that shows up when they're like this, and they have what I call a piggy tail. Their tail's real tight and curly like this. So even though the color, these will vary from almost blonde color to bright colors of red, brown, and a little yellow. So you can't go off of color. And I'm going to keep emphasizing that pattern and color are not the things to really look for in snake ID. And this is an interesting defense. I know Nature Club people may be worried that, well, I took a picture of a dead snake. This is a hognose last round of defense. For a few of them I've got, it's their first round of defense. They're kind of funny. They won't all do this. But this guy is active. He's totally active. He's playing dead. They figure if they play dead, everybody will leave them alone and go away. They even have their mouth open, their tongue hanging out. But one thing I've always noticed, they have their eye looking towards you most of the time because they're just watching and waiting. But you can see this guy, he's got the piggy tail. He looks like he's been killed for sure. And he may stay this way for 5 or 10 minutes until he thinks it's safe, and then he'll flip back over and crawl off. They're really interesting snakes. And the reason they're called hognose, they have a little upturned snout. And that's one reason. We have the eastern in West Texas, what's called the western hognose. The next category, those were the ones mostly with patterns, the rat snakes, the hognose. So if you see a pattern, it's going to be one of those. Stripes. We only have a few snakes with stripes, and these are pretty distinctive and easy to tell once you've seen them and remember this. This is called the Texas patch nose. And the key to these stripe snakes is the color of their stripe and their color. Even though I say colors don't always matter, the Texas patch nose always have this yellowish line going down. They get their name for a little flat spot on their nose. That's called a patch nose. You see these in your flower bed. They crawl around on your plants. They will get up in a shrub. They eat little mice. They'll eat bugs. They eat whatever they can catch. But they're normally about 2 to 3 feet is the largest you would see one. And these are totally harmless. When you see them out in the flower bed, you can just leave them there because they're actually a good snake to have around. Another one of our Sun City residents took this picture for us. She lives over close to the end of Stetson Street. And this is a red stripe ribbon snake. You see again, it's got the long stripe, and it's called red stripe for a reason, because it's got that red stripe. It's a long, slender snake. This is a good size one. This one's probably over 3 feet, which is pretty long for a red stripe. Normally, these guys love water. So if you're down in the bottomlands or closer to water, you're more likely to see these. And you'll see them swimming sometime out in the water. They like to eat a lot of things, minnows and small fish and frogs and things they can catch near the water. But right now where this is, there's no water in that part of Berry Creek. So they've got to wander around a little bit and find what they can. This is probably the most colorful snake we have here in Sun City, a black-necked garter snake. It has a bright orange stripe, and they're pretty true to color. They get their name from this black part at the top of their neck, and they usually have these spots on their sides, and the black and the orange. I just picked one of these up the other day at a lady's house. She was pretty upset. She was a big gardener, and liked to work out in her yard, and she had a toad that she thought was her friend, and she watched the black-necked garter snake come up and eat it. And so it ate and swallowed her favorite toad. She wasn't happy about that, but she was okay with me just carrying it to her backyard to a greenbelt and turn it loose, because she recognized it was a good beneficial snake to have around. Now the solid ones, which I say are mostly solid colored. The coach whip. This is a pretty common snake here. You can see where they get their name is from this tail, long center tail. They're almost always gray, and they're almost always solid colored with maybe a few blotches like this one. These can get up to about 5 feet long. They're usually pretty fast. They will get in garages. They'll get anywhere they can get. I have seen pictures of these snakes actually eating other snakes, including young rattlesnakes. So they'll eat whatever they can catch. Out in West Texas, these actually come in a reddish pink color. And they're so fast, you see them shoot across the road and then they're gone. You can't even stop to take a picture because they usually keep moving. We have rescued a number of these in garages out of glue traps, which we try to discourage. They also will get stuck in deer netting, which we also don't encourage that either, because once they're stuck, they don't get loose. And this is a beneficial snake here. One we don't see very often. Matter of fact, one of the snake guys, Joe Plunkett, called me recently. I have never personally, in hundreds of snakes in Sun City, I hadn't personally run across a rough earth snake. They're just a plain colored snake. They're much bigger than the DKs and the brown snake that we'll see in a minute. They're just plain brown, and you can almost call them a plain brown snake. They're called a rough earth snake because the scales on them have a little raise in the middle of their scales, so that's where they got their name. They're not very common. If it was 12 inches long to 18 inches long, would probably be an average size that you would see these guys. And here's the yellow belly or blue racer. People up north call them blue racers because they consider this back colored kind of bluish. Some dogs are called blue when they have this kind of shade color. But they have a bright yellow belly. One was caught recently here in Sun City by one of the guys. And actually my friend John Lee took this picture and I was trying to pose him for him. And he was very uncooperative. They're very, very fast. And this guy was really, really snippy too. He didn't like posing and didn't like sitting there, and he didn't much like anybody or anything close to it. But we've only found 4 of these in all the years. And so if you see this guy, you'll recognize them by their yellowish bottom. But we want to be sure and find out about those. All of them we've caught so far, I believe, have been over toward the direction of Cowan and that side of Sun City. We don't see this guy very much. I grew up with lots of them, but it's a rough green snake. You can't mistake them. They're green. They're solid green. There's what's called a smooth green snake that's almost gone from Texas, but the only distinction is the scales themselves. These are shaped differently, so that's where they get their name. They're a long, slender snake. 2 feet long is probably a pretty good sized adult. Sometimes you'll see them in your yard, and you can see they don't eat much. They've got pretty small prey. Then the non-venomous water snakes. This is our blotched water snake. I took the picture of this one particularly to show you that they try to imitate a cottonmouth. And they do that by trying to make their head triangular. They will actually flatten out their head, and so people will swear they're a cottonmouth, and they have a pretty thick body. They're not very nice to handle. They can musk really powerful. Most of us snake guys don't look forward to grabbing one of these because their musk is so strong, it's almost like you've been sprayed by a skunk. And they usually are not very nice and don't let you hold them very much. These live in our ponds and lakes, exclusive water snake. I have taken a few out of people's private ponds in their backyards where the snake managed to smell water from some distance and make its way to their pond and found a nice place. And if they had fish in there, their fish are probably gone before long, because if one of these gets in your pond, he's going to eat all your fish you've got in there. This one in particular, I believe, came from the pond behind the social center. You can see them out there sometimes sunning. When we have a new monitor at the social center, sometimes they'll call us because one of these guys will crawl up there on the sidewalk and they'll be in a panic that there's a big cottonmouth out there. So we go pick it up and put it back in the pond. And I don't have the video today, but actually I do have a video I took one day when I took some minnows up to the social center pond and actually shook a minnow in the water, and one of these young blotch snakes swam across the pond and took them out of my hand. I know the CA people wouldn't believe it, but I sent them the video. This is the other water snake we have here. They don't show up on my chart as very numerous because it's not that they're that scarce, it's that people don't call us on them because they just don't hardly ever stray far from the major water bodies we have here. One of the golf ponds, or especially Legacy Park down there, people see a snake out there sunning on the rocks. Most of the time, it's a diamondback water snake. And they are big muskers. Most of the time, you're not going to encounter these at all unless you see them down at Legacy, like I said, laying on the rocks. And they're harmless to people. And then the last category of the non-venomous is what I call the little guys. This is a DK's brown snake. People mistake these for copperheads, but I can tell you an adult is about 12 inches long. So that's how small they are. I caught a young one in my flower bed here recently, and it was about 3 inches long. It was probably a couple of months old. They like to eat earthworms, and so they'll hide under the leaves and under your mulch, and you won't see them much, but they're not copperheads. So you certainly don't want to kill them. They are good snakes to be around the yard. And I had to sneak this picture in. This is actually my granddaughter, and she's holding one of these brown snakes, just to show you how harmless they are. She's holding an adult Texas brown snake, and she was 4 years old at the time. So they really won't hurt you. You can pick them up. They couldn't bite you if they wanted. Their mouth is so small. And the tiniest snake we have here is the blind snake. We don't find very many these at all, primarily because people think they're earthworms if they run across one. But you can see if you look real close, this one actually has eyes. Even though it's called a blind snake and is pretty blind, it does have eyes, and it's a snake, not a worm. But you see the size of them compared to a quarter. They're really small. If you see an earthworm in your flower bed, pick him up and look at him. An earthworm is going to have a pointed tail and a different head that's not really a head so much. We'd like to see more of these, but they're just, people don't spot them. Now the venomous species. I want to talk about a couple of terms here that you can maybe impress people with sometime if you want to tell them this, because they misuse these terms a lot. The term venomous applies to an animal that delivers poison through a fangs, a sting, or a bite. It's more or less injected. Primarily snake bites, insect stings. Put on here, actually, there's one mammal, the duck-billed platypus, that y'all have heard of. It has some rear foot spurs that have poison in them during the mating season, just for fighting purposes. Poisonous, which a lot of people say there's a poisonous snake. They're not really, they're venomous is the correct term. Poisonous is when they have a passively delivered toxin or poison, like a poisonous dart frog. Our Gulf Coast toads aren't actually poisonous, but they do have some toxic chemical that they release. If one of your dogs has ever grabbed one and tried to chew on it, they'll come away with their mouth foaming. And if they actually eat the toad, it can make them really sick because they do have some poison. First one of our venomous snakes is the Texas coral snake. This is really a pretty snake. I find more Texas coral snakes here in Sun City than probably any place, but there are a lot of them around Georgetown, around Lake Georgetown. They're not totally uncommon, but they're not common either. Some of our snake wranglers will go a full year without seeing one, and sometimes we'll get 7 or 8 or 10 or 12 of them in 1 year. One of the defense mechanisms of the coral snake, which you can notice when you just glance at it, there's no distinctive neck or head shape on the snake. That's defensive. When a coral snake gets grabbed, they thrash around and act like they're crazy and spastic. And that's so that something can't tell their head from their tail. Because you think about a roadrunner or a hawk or an owl that wants to scoop down, the first thing they want to do is peck them on the head. But if they can't tell where their head is, they have a hard time doing that. And I wanted to show you this because of the rhyme that we've all heard before. Red and yellow kill a fella, red and black friend of Jack. And there's different versions of that rhyme. But you don't need to know that here. If it's a snake with colored bands on it, not stripes, but bands, it's a coral snake here. We don't have the Mexican milk snake. We don't have the scarlet snake. And then there's a brightly colored snake called the long-necked snake we find in the Trans-Pecos that we don't have here either. So if it has bands, and I know I did go to a lady's house one day and she was on her enclosed patio drinking coffee, and she said while she was sitting there, a snake crawled in and then crawled back out of her screen door where there was a little hole at the bottom. And I asked her and she said it was a striped snake. So I was crawling around in the bushes looking for it, and she brought a picture outside and showed me. She said it looked just like this, which it was a coral snake. So it's not striped, it's banded. So that's a difference. But to tell you the truth, you have to work hard to get a coral snake to bite you. And here's something I threw in just for interest's sake, not from Sun City, but you never want to trust color 100% on snakes. This is a coral snake, believe it or not. They have color aberrations. Rattlesnakes have the same thing. There are albino rattlesnakes that are colorless, and there are what's called patternless rattlesnakes. We actually have a few of those in Williamson County. They show up around Manor that are patternless rattlesnakes. They're western diamondbacks, but they have no pattern on them at all. About coral snakes. Coral snake venom's a neurotoxin. And I said predominantly because there are some coral snakes over in East Texas and in the Southeast that have a mixture. They have neurotoxin and hemotoxin in them. The neurotoxin affects your nervous system. Hemotoxins affect tissue in the body. And the biggest danger with a coral snake is they can shut down lungs and breathing functions. But the coral snake bites are so infrequent that nobody manufactures the antivenom anymore. A few foreign companies do. There was one in Mexico that did, but no hospital is going to have the antivenom on hand. They have to find it in a zoo or a specialty snake place that might keep it on hand, because it doesn't last forever, and they don't want to spend the money because nobody gets bit by corals. And one of the things people need to see is that it's a myth about coral snakes that they have to chew. They don't have to chew on you. Their venom is extremely toxic in small amounts. I said nobody gets bit usually unless they pick one up. I don't think there's been a snake bite in Texas of anyone unless they picked one up, and then it's usually one a year or something. These snakes like to hide. Dr. Christensen, some of you may have heard before, he went and caught one at a house one day, and he put it in a sack and put his boot on top of the sack while he was talking, and he didn't notice that the snake had stuck its head out the top of the sack. So when he went to pick it up, it nicked him on the little finger. One tooth out of that coral snake nicked his finger as he was shaking it off. And he says it was instantly like fire running through his hand, and it caused his whole arm to turn red. And he fortunately didn't have to have antivenom, and he got over it because it was a small amount, but it did have a huge effect on him. That snake didn't chew on it. It doesn't have to. Coral snakes rarely bite humans, only if you pick them up. If you don't pick them up, they're not going to bite you. There's been kids and other people that have picked them up. Dr. Christensen tells me that, or Jim tells me that he got a call one day from some ladies that actually were holding a coral snake, and they call him here in Sun City, and they were proud that it was a beautiful snake, and they were holding it while he came to get it. I would never do that because they're not a snake that I would want to hold in my hand. They mostly eat other snakes. So I always say, if you don't like snakes, you should love corals. They can't hardly keep these snakes alive in captivity, a coral snake, unless you feed it other snakes. So most people that keep them, they keep some kind of frozen, real small snake. Corals don't get very large. Here in Sun City, the largest one I've ever caught was just about 3 feet or a little over, and that was an extremely large coral snake. This tells you a little bit. It's kind of random. I threw this graph in, but we are talking about rattlesnake, coral snakes, rat snakes, and this says how many we get per year. It looks like we had a huge explosion in snakes about 2013 or 2014. The truth is we didn't. What we had was prior to 2012 or 13, mostly Jim Christensen and a man named Dick Wooleder and Joe Bennett helped also, were the ones that responded to calls. People weren't calling in as much back then. We didn't have brochures out there. They weren't as informed who to call. I know we lost Joe Bennett and Dick Wooleder both. So Joe Plunkett joined the snake guys, and I did, and John Leake. And we really promoted people reporting them and calling us even if it wasn't venomous. And that's what's caused the big spike in numbers. But we are having a decline this year. We're not sure why yet. We'll have to look at it over time. But our numbers are down for 2019. This is a typical coral you're going to see out on a trail. I took this picture on Blue Heron Trail. I was down there one day and I heard some birds fussing or something. I stopped for a minute and he would just crawl across the path in front of me. That's what they do. They usually, and if I'd have tried to touch him with a stick, he would have just taken off and disappeared under the leaves. They're extremely shy. If you call someone, you find one in your yard, you need to keep your eye on it, because most of the time, if you walk away for a minute, it's going to disappear under the leaves and we'll never be able to find it. Here's just a separation of the, this is the Western Diamondback graph itself to show you. You know, we've run as many as 100 per year calls on rattlesnakes. We have a pretty healthy number here in Sun City, but it actually shows you that they're not as scary as most people take them to be, because with this many rattlesnakes year after year, the number of people bitten in Sun City is extremely low. We do lose some dogs to rattlesnakes, but most of the rattlesnake bites here can be avoided with a little bit of caution. We made this card some years ago. This was a young little diamondback rattlesnake, and I coined the term raccoon tail for rattlesnakes, because a small little rattlesnake, people wonder and they'll try to look at its head. Well, is it triangular? And it's got a pattern. Maybe it's a rat snake. We don't know. If you wanted to get on your hands and knees, you could see if it has vertical pupils, but you would have to be about 6 inches from him, which I wouldn't advise. But all rattlesnakes, this guy was newborn. He's got a button. They're born with a button. He can't rattle. He can't make noise. They all have this raccoon tail, it's called. Something happened to my Zoom. Okay. There it is. It's back. This is a typical rattlesnake that we have here that's in the process of striking. When you see one like this, rattlesnake can strike maybe up to half of its body length. And so if you figure a really large rattlesnake for Sun City is 4 feet, if you were 2 feet away, you're not in real danger. They're not perfectly accurate on their strikes. I always tell people 6 feet. If you're 6 feet away from a rattlesnake, you are 100% safe. They aren't going to come after you. They aren't going to come over and bite you. They're only going to go away, if anything, to try to get away from you. But you see, even in this adult, that raccoon tail is there. If you can't see anything else, you can see that, and you know that's a rattlesnake. I threw this one in just for comparison's sake, since we were talking about rattlesnakes. This again is back to our Great Plains rat snake. I have a lot of calls from people that say they have a rattlesnake, and it's this one that shows up. See, it doesn't have the raccoon tail. Sorry, that's way on the edge of the screen. But it's got this little arrowhead shaped pattern on the back of its head. So it does have a pattern. People say, well, it's got diamonds. But it's a differently shaped snake, more slender than a rattlesnake, doesn't have the raccoon tail. But you can't really look at the head, because a lot of snakes have a head that's got a little bit of a triangular shape. I've seen a lot of people confused by that. I told some other guys in the Nature Club the other day, I went to a call one day, and they had called the police, and there were 2 patrolmen at the house looking at this snake, trying to figure out if it had a triangular head. And it was a rat snake. It wasn't a rattlesnake at all. These are some babies. I need to move through these. These are some baby rattlesnakes we pick up here in Sun City. They're born in August into September. This is what they typically look like when you find them. This is 3 that I picked up here, cruising around at nighttime in my golf cart. If you see me at night, I'm not out doing anything devious or illegal. I'm looking to pick these guys up. Find them along the curbs, and we like to collect them because people walk their dogs. Here's how you mulch picture. I took this picture. You see they coil up, they blend in really well. If we close in on him and make a close-up, you can see this is the way you find them. This is what they like to do. They like to curl up in a tight little ball. And it's only 3 or 4 inches across for a baby, so it's really small. We find them on porches and patios. You can see this is one right here, and this is really typical. Most of the snakes don't coil up in a ball like this. It's usually the rattlesnakes. And so if you can't see their tail, but it's coiled like this, that's a pretty good indicator. Snake bites. We'll talk about them real quick. About 7,000 people are bitten in the U.S. every year by venomous snakes. Only 1 out of 500 actually die. And I would add to that that most of those 1 out of 500s don't go and get treatment. There are some people that just don't get treated. They don't go to the hospital, and then they end up dying from it. 1 to 2 people in Texas die each year. In Texas, and about 6 total in the U.S. About half of the venomous snake bites from rattlesnakes are dry bites. In other words, they don't inject any venom, they just bite. And in the time period 7 years, 1,100 deaths were from hornet, wasp, and bee stings, for 62 deaths per year, 10 times higher than snakes. So that kind of tells you you've got a much higher chance of getting hit by lightning or die from wasp and bee stings than you do a snake bite. People do get bitten while trying to kill a rattlesnake. Can a rattlesnake strike and deliver venom after it has been decapitated? Absolutely, that's not a myth. Their nervous system is amazing, and their muscle system. They can clamp down and deliver venom even with their head cut off. What not to do for snake bite victims. Do not attempt to suck venom from the bite wound. You don't want to do that. It doesn't do any good. If you had a cut in your mouth, you would be taking in a snake bite in your mouth. Do not make cuts. This can cause more trauma and damage than doing nothing. Do not apply tourniquet or constricting advice. That was the old way. But what you're doing is concentrating the venom. If somebody gets bit on the hand or a foot, you put a tourniquet on there, it concentrates the venom. It's better for the venom to actually go through the bloodstream than to be concentrated, because that venom is destroying tissue. And if you concentrate it, you're more likely you're going to lose a finger or a toe or a foot or a hand. Do not apply cold pack or ice. Do not apply electrical shock. At one time they were selling shockers, kind of like a stun gun. Said if you shocked your snake bite, it would make you instantly okay. And that is not true at all. Do not take pain reliever or other medications unless the doctor tells you to. They can thin your blood, aspirin, and without saying, you don't want to get drunk after you've been snake bit. This was a picture of a park ranger, very experienced with handling snakes. He was down in Florida. He was picking up a snake with using tools to put it in a bag, and he just lost his concentration for 1 minute, and it snagged his finger, and you can see this is what happened. If you see a rattlesnake, stay 6 to 8 feet away. Do not attempt to catch it or kill it. Not only have people been bitten while trying to kill a rattlesnake, they've also misidentified and killed harmless snakes. We get pretty frustrated when we get a call someone has already killed a snake while we're headed over there, and then they're sure it's a rattlesnake, and it's not at all. It turns out to be a rattlesnake. Western diamondbacks are not aggressive. They won't chase you. They won't come toward you to bite. They'll generally lie still, hoping you didn't see them, in order to crawl away as soon as you're out of sight. I have stood in front of a snake den or in the middle of a snake den with 15 of them all around me and being between me and their den opening. And when they finally panic and go for the den, they'll crawl right past me, and they don't bite you on the way down. If you're leaving the house at night, carry a flashlight. I see people all the time walking at night with no flashlight, right along the curbs where we pick up rattlesnakes. And we're near the end of this. This was an ID guide we created. I won't take a lot of time. John and I put this together. It has venomous on one side, non-venomous on the other. I've got my information on this slide program. We weren't able to circulate these. The Nature Club and the CA both paid to have them printed, but then we got shut down. So if any of y'all want a copy of this, the next few days, I'll put some out on my porch at 115 Whippoorwill Way. Martin Byhire, if you know Martin, I don't have his address handy, but he said he'd put some out on his porch. I think he has some. So we want to get as many people as we can to have this to help them out. This is the other side of it. And it does have the snake people's names and phone numbers on it. And this was just a picture I threw in for the fun of it, since y'all all are comfortable with snakes now. No, this was not in Sun City. This is up north in Canada. These garter snakes do this when they breed and they come out after the winter. Here's my phone number. You can call me or text me. My email if you have other questions we don't get answered. And people do send me pictures of snakes they've taken on the phone. And as soon as I catch that I've received a text, I'll respond back to you. Well, thank all y'all, the audience today. Appreciate it very much. And any questions I can take on that.
Great, because we have a lot of them, Steve. We've got the first one. What's the most aggressive snake that you found here?
I don't like to use the word aggressive. I like defensive, because snakes
Okay.
go out of their way to try to bite you. They do when they're scared or they're trying to defend themselves. And so I usually tend to call them grumpy or cranky, like sometimes we get when we get older. But the water snake, probably the blotched water snake, is the worst. That's the only snake I've ever had. When I went to release it, it wanted to turn around and bite me before it left. And, the blotched water snakes are just pretty nasty. They're always in a grumpy mood. They're just not a happy snake.
You have a favorite snake, and why do you like snakes so much?
I've always been around snakes. I'm a wildlife biologist, but contrary to what most people think, a lot of us wildlife biologists, we spend all day sitting in front of a computer writing. So snakes are almost a hobby for me. And they're just real fascinating, just like other people like other things, but all the animals are. And I volunteer in Sun City. That actually gives me some hands-on time out in the field. I actually get to touch an animal. And I know Jim Christensen the other day, it's hard for people to think this, but he told me the snake calls have been so slow that he was spending time talking to people about armadillos on the phone just because he wanted to talk to somebody about some kind of animal. So yeah, it's interesting for some of us.
Are there any snakes that climb trees besides rat snakes?
A rattlesnake would never be found more than 2 or 3 feet off the ground. It might be up in but even that's really uncommon. Some of the other garter snakes, of course, the rough green snake, the earth snake, some of those, they can climb trees. They're not big climbers. And all the garter snakes, they'll climb shrubs and they can climb a tree. But the one that's the most often found climbing is the rat snake. And the Great Plains rat snakes aren't much climbers. They're mostly on the ground.
Right. Of course, the big question we all want to know is, have you been bitten by a snake?
No, I have not my entire life. I started getting snakes. I grew up in country where they had rattlesnake roundups, and before I was educated to know better, I used to participate in those roundups, and we would bring in snakes by the pound to sell, and bags and trash can full, and hundreds of snakes. So we'd catch them out at their den. I was fortunate then. I have had snakes hit me on the lower leg, rattlesnakes. But generally, if I'm in snake country, I've always worn boots or some kind of leggings. When I go to West Texas, Trans-Pecos, my wife and I finding snakes, we both wear leggings, almost up to our knees. And so that keeps us from getting bit. And I don't handle them. I don't handle them with my hands. I use hooks or tongs even now. There's no reason to ever handle a venomous snake with your bare hands unless you're going to be extracting venom, which none of us are going to be doing that.
I think that's smart. Well, did our brown snake used to be called the Texas brown snake?
Yes, it's called both. It's a
Okay.
DK brown snake. The scientific name is what is it? Story-eyed DKI. And so obviously somebody named DK named it. So most snake people call it the DKs, but it's the same snake. The Texas brown, the DK's brown snake. It's the same snake.
Okay. And besides humans, what are the snake's greatest predators?
Probably road runners, birds, foxes, coyotes, raccoons. I normally don't pick up dead snakes. None of the snake wranglers do because we say we're not a garbage service. But if a snake, I have picked up a few where someone was so elderly they couldn't handle it, and it got hit by a car and it was on their porch or something. It died. I have picked them up and I put one out one night behind my house where I have a green belt. And that night a raccoon grabbed it right after dark and carried it off. And so your raccoons will eat live or dead, whatever they can catch.
Okay. Will you relocate harmless snakes to protect them from my neighbors? Somebody asked.
Yes. My philosophy, and I think all the other snake guys too, is we want to tell you what it is, and we can explain to you if it's a harmless snake or not. But if you're not comfortable with it, people have genuine phobias of snakes. A lot of people do, especially if it's going to scare you or alarm you. You've got a large snake, and it might cause someone to jump or fall or hurt themselves. If it was on their porch, then I always ask, do you want me to take it away and relocate it or leave it here? And I can tell you, we don't take the non-venomous snakes very far away. Maybe they'll come back. Most of them don't. We don't get repeat calls for snakes from the same place. I think the snake probably figures out that's not a good place to be if it gets grabbed and off, and so it doesn't want to go back to that particular place. But it all depends on what the people want. If they want it moved, we'll move it.
Okay. We've got about maybe 10 more questions, but I think what we'll do is we'll take a couple more, and then you can see the rest of them, and maybe you could respond to them in writing if you wanted to, or however you'd like to do that, Steve. Another question was if you have people have photos of snakes that they have in Sun Cities have seen, would you like for them to send them? Who should we send them those to for your research or counting purposes?
You can send them to the only person that doesn't have text is Jim Christensen. His phone's not capable of text. But Joe Plunkett, John Leake, or I, our phone numbers are on those snake guides, and they're in the Sunrays too every month. You can text us a picture. We don't particularly want a picture you took last month somewhere, but when you have a current picture and you say, I saw this big snake on the corner right at 107 Trail Rider, then we can use that information. We need the address and a clear enough picture so that we can identify.
Okay, and Martin Byauer has added his address because he has some of those snake brochures. So his address is 105 Silver Bell Circle, and that's off Trail of the Flowers. What do you do? Are young rattlesnakes more dangerous than older rattlesnakes?
That's always a question, and people talk about the venom toxicity. There is some research that says the toxicity of venom is slightly higher in a young rattlesnake. But the truth is, with venom, rattlesnake venom, quantity is what matters. And so a young rattlesnake doesn't have near the quantity of a large rattlesnake. I think the young ones are probably a little more dangerous just because when they're born, they don't hang around mama very long. There's usually 10 or 12 of them, and they're born alive late August, September in our area. And then they scatter. They start going out like a wagon wheel. And the young ones aren't smart enough to know not to get on people's porches, or right up in their front flower bed, or on their patio. And so they're probably a little more dangerous just because of that. Now, the larger ones, they'll generally avoid people, and that's how they get to be as old and big as they are. I picked one up the other night, John and I did, that unfortunately people lost their dog. It was about 4 feet. Well, the dog, I think, sniffed right up on it and bit it. But most of the time, they're going to avoid people and avoid getting too close if they're large. So the little ones may be a little bit more dangerous just by virtue of they get up close to people and don't avoid people as much.
Okay. Well, Steve, this has been wonderful. There's still a few more questions, but Mary Jane had a great suggestion. She suggested that we go ahead and write down the questions, which I will do, and then see if we can put the answers in Nature Notes this month. So we really want to thank you, Steve, and your address is 115 Whippoorwill Way. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, and I'll put
Okay.
some out on the front porch for the next day or two. I won't keep them out there indefinitely because
Okay.
they'll get wet. Don't come after dark. I have a motion sensitive sprinkler to keep the deer away, and you'll get wet if you come after dark. And so just a word of caution.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Steve, and we're going to go ahead and go back to Bill, and it's been wonderful.